In a land where the whispers of ancient spirits danced with the winds and the vibrant colors of life filled every corner, a tale begins. This is no ordinary story, but one of love, a love that crosses oceans, cultures, and tradition. But no one ever imagined that such a love would spring from a chance meeting between an adventurous American woman named Clara and a prince, Kofi, weighed down by his own royal duties. Beneath the moon's watchful eye and the golden African sky, their journey unfolds. A journey filled with love, discovery, and challenges they never saw coming. Clara Johnson had always felt out of place in her small Georgia town, while her friends were content with the quiet, predictable life of their rural community. Clara was always dreaming of distant lands, faraway cultures, and adventures that went beyond the boundaries of her hometown. From a young age, she would pore over travel books and documentaries, feeling the call of places she had never been but longed to experience. As she grew older, that sense of wanderlust only deepened. Her days were filled with work and responsibilities, but in her free time, she saved money and planned for the day she could finally leave her familiar world behind. When she heard about a vibrant Massai village in Africa, nestled among mountains and rivers, it was as if a light had been switched on inside her. Something about the village spoke to her. Its culture, its people, and the stories of ancient traditions that seemed to come alive in her imaginations. After months of preparation, the day finally came. Clara boarded a plane with a heart full of excitement, leaving her small town behind, ready to embrace the unknown. When she landed in the village, the air was warm and the landscape spread before her like a vivid painting. Bright red and orange clothes worn by the villagers, the deep green of the trees, and the shimmering blues of the rivers that cut through the land. Music floated through the air, accompanied by the laughter of children playing and the clatter of villagers going about their daily routines. Clara's eyes widened in a wonder as she took in the scene. The village was alive in ways she had only dreamed about. Women carried baskets on their heads, men laughed and walked in groups, and a sense of community seemed to bind everyone together. She admired the way the villagers moved with ease, each part of the day flowing into the next with a rhythm that felt timeless. But as she explored the village, Clara couldn't shake a sense of restlessness, even as she admired the colors and culture around her. Something inside her felt incomplete. She had come seeking adventure, but she felt as though she was searching for something more, something deeper that she couldn't yet name. One afternoon, Clara decided to venture beyond the village. The forest that surrounded the area beckoned to her with its thick trees and mysterious shadows. Drawn by a sense of curiosity and a desire for solitude, she followed a narrow path that wound its way into the heart of the forest. The air was cooler here, and the sounds of the village faded into the distance, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. As she walked deeper into the woods, Clara stumbled upon a small clearing. There, sitting on a large rock, was a young man, lost in the music he played on a wooden flute. The sound was gentle and haunting, the kind of melody that seemed to speak directly to the soul. Clara stood at the edge of the clearing, captivated by the music. She didn't want to interrupt, but something about the young man and his song drew her closer. The young man was Prince Kofi, heir to the nearby kingdom. Unlike most people in his position, Kofi often sought solace in nature, away from the pastures of royal life. He was more than just a prince. He was also a guardian of the ancient wisdom passed down through generations. But on this day, Kofi was simply a man enjoying the peace of the forest and the sound of his flute. After a moment of hesitation, Clara stepped forward and her voice soft but clear. "Your music is beautiful," she said, offering a warm smile. Kofi opened his eyes, surprised to see her, but not alarmed. He returned her smile, his eyes gentle. "Thank you," he replied. "Music has a way of speaking when words cannot. But what brings you here, so far from the village?" Clara blushed slightly, feeling a little out of place. "I came here seeking adventure, but I think I'm looking for something more than that," she admitted. "I'm not sure what it is yet, though." Kofi looked at her thoughtfully. Sometimes what we are searching for isn't something we can see right away. It takes time for the heart to understand its own desires. From that moment, the conversation between Clara and Kofi flowed easily, as if they had known each other for much longer than a few minutes. They spoke about their lives, Clara sharing stories of her small town upbringing and the excitement of New York City, and Kofi telling her about the traditions and history of his people. Clara learned that Kofi was not only a prince, but also burdened by the expectations of his royal lineage. He was expected to marry someone from within the kingdom to fulfill his duties as heir to the throne. Despite these responsibilities, Kofi found comfort in his conversations with Clara. They met frequently, often exploring the forest together or sitting beneath the shade of the ancient baobab tree. Each meeting deepened their bond, and Clara began to see that her restlessness was fading, replaced by the warmth and connection she felt with Kofi. But as their relationship grew, Clara couldn't ignore the weight of the differences between them. She was from a distant land, and he was bound by royal tradition. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the baobab tree, Clara voiced her concerns. "What if your people don't accept me, Kofi? I'm just a visitor here, a stranger. How could I ever belong in your world?" Kofi turned to her, his dark eyes filled with sincerity. He gently took her hand in his, his touch warm and reassuring. "Love knows no boundaries, Clara," he said. "It doesn't care where we come from or what titles we carry. You have already captured my heart, and I will fight for us." Clara's heart swelled with emotion, but she knew the path ahead would not be easy. They were from different worlds, and the challenges they would face would be great. Yet in that moment, as they sat beneath the towering baobab tree, Clara felt a sense of peace, knowing that they would face whatever came together. As Clara and Kofi's bond deepened, whispers spread through the village. The elders, worried about Kofi's affection for an outsider, warned him that tradition must be upheld, and that marrying Clara would bring chaos to their land. But Kofi was determined to be with her, so he sought the wisdom of Mama Zola, the village eldest and most revered spiritual guide. Entering her humble home, the smell of herbs filled the air as Mama Zola greeted him. "You come seeking answers, young prince," she said knowingly. Kofi nodded, his face troubled. "I love Clara, but the elders won't accept her. How can I make them to see that our love is true?" Mama Zola studied him for a moment before speaking. "Love is strong, but tradition is powerful. To win their acceptance, you must prove the strength of your bond through the spirits. The spirits of this land guard the hearts of the river, a sacred gem that symbolizes pure love. To show your people that your love is worthy, you must retrieve it. But beware, the journey will be perilous." Kofi's heart raced, but his resolve did not waver. I'll do whatever it takes. What must I do? Mama Zola's eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom. You must find the heart of the river, hidden deep within the sacred waters and guarded by the water spirits. Only those whose love is pure can succeed. Before Kofi could leave, Mama Zola gave him a warning. The journey will test every part of you, and the spirits may not be kind. Be brave and let your love guide you. That evening, Kofi told Clara about the challenge ahead. I have to find the heart of the river to prove our love, but it's dangerous. I don't want you to risk your life. Clara's response was immediate. We're in this together, Kofi. I'm not afraid. Kofi hesitated. The water spirit is unpredictable. I can't let you be hurt. But Clara stood firm. I love you. And that means facing whatever challenges lie ahead together. Realizing he couldn't dissuade her, Kofi nodded. We'll leave the first light. At dawn, Clara and Kofi set out for the sacred river, the quiet of the forest surrounding them. As they reached the river bank, Kofi turned to Clara, his face serious. This is where our test begins. The water spirit guards the heart of the river, and we must prove our love. Clara nodded, determined. Together they waded into the river. Suddenly the water spirit emerged, her form shimmering like the water itself. Why do you disturb my waters? She asked. We seek the heart of the river to prove our love, Kofi replied. The water spirit's eyes narrowed. Love is powerful, but it must be proven. You must pass 3 trials to earn the heart. The river shifted, and they found themselves facing a wise tortoise and a sly fox. The tortoise spoke slowly. What's the strongest force in the universe? Clara, after a moment of thought, stepped forward. Love is the strongest force. It brings people together and overcomes all obstacles. The tortoise nodded approvingly, and the fox scowled. You have passed the first trial, the tortoise said. Next, they stood at the dark part of the river, where a glowing pearl lay deep beneath the surface. The water was colder and the current stronger, but Clara and Kofi entered the water together, fighting against the force. With great effort, Clara reached the pearl and brought it to the surface. The water calmed and they passed the second trial, the trial of the heart. For the final trial, the water spirit appeared again, her voice solemn. Now you must face the trial of the heart. Dark visions surrounded them. Clara saw herself lost and alone, far from home, while Kofi saw himself trapped in royal duties, unable to be with Clara. But instead of succumbing to fear, they turned to each other, their hands clasped tightly. We're stronger together, Kofi said. Yes, no fear can tear us apart, Clara agreed. Their love banished the dark visions, and the water spirit smiled. You have proven your love. The heart of the river is yours. She patted the waters, revealing the glowing gem, which Kofi took. Together they set off to return to the village. As the water spirit led Clara and Kofi deeper into the river, the air around them shifted. Suddenly, they found themselves before a wise tortoise and a cunning fox, both seated on stones near the water's edge. The first trial is the trial of wisdom, the tortoise said slowly. Answer this. What is the strongest force in the universe? Clara and Kofi exchanged glances, their minds racing. Finally, Clara stepped forward. Love. Love is the strongest force. It can move mountains, heal wounds, and unite even those from different worlds. The tortoise nodded Satisfied, you have passed the first trial. The folks, clearly displeased, slinked away, and the waters around them began to swirl, carrying them to the next challenge, the trial of strength. The water turned colder, darker. Before them, beneath the surface, a glowing pearl shimmered at the bottom of a deep, icy pool. "This is the trial of strength," Kofi whispered. "We must retrieve the pearl." Without hesitation, Clara and Kofi waded into the freezing water. The strong current fought against them, and the cold beat at their skin. But they pressed forward, side by side. Each step was a struggle, the water pulling them back, but their determination pushed them forward. Clara's fingers finally closed around the pearl, and the current instantly slowed. With the pearl in hand, they emerged from the water, their breaths heavy but victorious. They had passed the second trial. For the final trial, the water spirit appeared once more, her expression unreadable. "Now you must face the trial of the hearts." As she spoke, the water around them began to ripple, and dark visions swirled in the air. Clara saw herself alone in a foreign land, while Kofi saw himself trapped in his royal duties, unable to be with Clara. These visions tugged at their deepest fears. But instead of yielding to the fear, Kofi took Clara's hand. "We are stronger together," he said, his voice steady. Clara nodded, gripping his hand tightly. "Nothing can come between us." Their love shone like a beacon, pushing away the darkness. The water spirits, seeing their bond, smile. "You have proven the strength of your love," she said softly. "The heart of the river is yours." With a wave of her hand, the waters parted, revealing the glowing gem. Kofi took the heart of the river, holding it close as they prepared to return to the village. As Kofi and Clara returned to the village, they believed their quest had proven their love. Kofi presented the heart of the river to the elders, confident they had earned acceptance. The villagers gathered, their eyes wide in awe of the legendary gem, but the elders' faces remained grave. "You have retrieved the heart of the river, Prince Kofi," one elder said. "But it is not a simple symbol. By removing it, you have disrupted the balance with the spirits. They are angered, and there will be consequences." Clara felt a chill. "We didn't know," she said. "We thought this would show our love." The elder shook his head. "The heart of the river is sacred, not to be disturbed. The spirits demand retribution. For the safety of the village, you and Clara must leave." "Leave?" Kofi repeated, shocked. "We meant no harm. There must be a way to fix this." "The damage is done," another elder responded. "The spirits will not rest while you remain here." The villagers began to murmur, torn between tradition and sympathy. Kofi's father, the king, stepped forward, his face filled with regret. "My son, I have always supported you, but you must go for now. The will of the people and the spirit is clear." Kofi's heart broke, but he knew there was no argument to be made. He looked at Clara, and they exchanged a glance of determination. "We'll leave," Kofi said, "but we'll come back. We'll find a way to restore balance and return." With that, Kofi and Clara packed what they could carry and walked through the village for what could be the last time. The villagers watched in silence, some avoiding their gaze, others filled with pity. At the village's edge, Kofi looked back one last time before turning to Clara. "We'll go to your own town in America," he said. "We'll figure this out and come back." Clara nodded. "Together, we can do anything." Hand in hand, they left the village behind, setting off on a new journey, determined to return stronger and restore what had been lost. Imagine being exiled from your homeland for daring to love someone from another world. Kofi, a prince from Africa, and Clara, a bold American, defied traditions to be together. But their love came at a price. Banished from Kofi's kingdom, they fled to Clara's small town in Georgia, hoping for a fresh start. But here, they are facing a whole new kind of danger. Corrupt officials, racist threats, and a town determined to drive them out. With their love, their future, and their unborn child at stake, they must fight to survive in a world that seems dead set against them. Can they overcome the forces working against them? Or will their story end in heartbreak? Stay tuned, because this journey is just beginning, and the twist will keep you on the edge of your seat. The sun was just beginning to set as Kofi and Clara stepped off the plane in Atlanta, painting the sky in warm oranges and pinks. The air was crisp, carrying the scents of pine trees and fresh autumn winds, a stark contrast to the humid plains and sweeping savannas they had left behind in Africa. For a moment, there was a sense of optimism that lingered between them, a feeling that perhaps here in Clara's homeland they could start fresh. "This place is beautiful," Kofi remarked as they stood outside the airport, gazing at the skyline of Atlanta in the distance. It was a city full of promise, gleaming with life and energy, its towering buildings reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. Clara smiled up at him, her hand squeezing his. "I told you Georgia had its charms. You will love it here." She led him to the car that was waiting to take them to their childhood home, her excitement growing. For Clara, this was a return to a place filled with fond memories, a place where she had grown up surrounded by warmth and love. She could picture the wide streets lined with trees, the friendly neighbors who waved from their porches, and the peaceful quiet of the countryside. The ride to the town where Clara had spent most of her youth was filled with conversation and laughter. They talked about the future, about how they would build a life here together, far from the chaos they had left behind. The house they were headed to, nestled in the woods just outside a small town, had been in Clara's family for generations. It was old but sturdy, a symbol of the stability Clara had always known. "We'll be happy here, Kofi," Clara said, leaning into him as they drove through the open countryside. "This place is peaceful. It will give us time to figure everything out." Kofi, despite the uncertainty of this new world, nodded in agreement. There was something hopeful about the air, something promising in the gentle hum of the world around them. Perhaps this would be start of something good, a chance to build a future far away from the difficulties they had faced in Africa. As they approached the house, it came into view, a charming, weathered home tucked away at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by towering trees. The golden light of the setting sun bathed it in warmth, making it look like something out of a postcard. It was quiet, serene, and for a moment it felt like everything was going to be okay. Clara sighed in contentment. "This is home." Kofi smiled, breathing in the fresh air. "It's beautiful. A place we can make our own." They unloaded their bags, eager to settle in. The house, though old, had a certain charm. Its creaky floors and worn-out furniture told stories of generations past, and the air inside was cool and refreshing. Clara's heart swelled with nostalgia as she walked through the familiar halls. Memories of her childhood flooding back with each step. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. They spent their time cleaning the house, restoring it to its former glory. They went for walks in the surrounding woods, enjoying the peace and tranquility. Neighbors waved as they passed by, and for a while it seemed though they had truly found a place where they could belong. The warmth of Clara's memories seemed to extend into the present, filling her with a sense of safety and belonging. But soon, beneath the surface of that quiet town, darker currents began to stir. The smiles from neighbors became less frequent, and the warm welcomes were replaced with cold, suspicious stares. What had started as hopeful new beginning began to shift into something more unsettling. It started gradually, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Kofi noticed it first, the way people's eyes lingered too long when they walked down the street, the way conversations would abruptly stop when they entered a room. At first, it seemed like harmless curiosity. After all, Clara had been gone for years, and Kofi was an unfamiliar face in a small, tight-knit community. But soon, the looks turned to whispers, and the whispers grew louder. I don't understand it, Clara said one afternoon, frowning as they walked back from the local markets. I grew up here. These people know me. They used to be so welcoming. Kofi's gaze was steady, his instinct sharper than Clara's in this case. It's not about you, it's about us. They don't understand us together. Clara bit her lip, her heart sinking. She had hoped that this town, her home, would be different, that the small mindedness she had seen in other places wouldn't exist here. But it became clear that their relationship, a black African man and a white American woman, was viewed with suspicion and disapproval. The smiles they had received when they first arrived were now replaced with tight-lipped nods, and polite conversation turned cold and distant. It wasn't long before the tension escalated. One morning, as Clara opened the front door to collect the mail, she found an envelope that had been shoved through the slot. She froze when she saw the angry, jagged handwriting scrawled across the page. Go back to where you came from. Her hands shook as she handed the note to Kofi. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered. This isn't the place I remember. Kofi read the note, his expression dark. People fear what they don't understand, and fear can turn to hate. The note didn't stop. Every few days, a new one would appear, sometimes in the mailbox, sometimes tucked under the front door. They all said the same thing in varying degrees of hostility. And it wasn't just the notes. People stopped talking to Clara in town. Her old friends, once warm and friendly, now avoided her. When they walked into the grocery store, conversations would die out, and they could feel eyes on them, watching, judging. One night, everything changed. It was late, and the house was dark and quiet when Clara woke to the acrid smell of smoke. Her heart pounded as she jumped out of bed, shaking Kofi awake. Kofi, wake up! Something's burning! Kofi was on his feet in an instant. Together they rushed outside, only to be met with the horrifying sight of flames creeping up the side of their home. Someone had set their house on fire. Panic surged through Clara as Kofi grabbed the nearest bucket and raced to the well. She called the fire department with trembling hands, but the flames were already leaking at the roof. By the time Kofi managed to douse part of the fire, the firefighters arrived just in time to prevent the entire house from burning down, but the damage had been done. The side of the house was charred black, and the smell of smoke lingered long after the fire had been extinguished. This wasn't random, Kofi said, his voice hard as steel. They're trying to scare us. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she surveyed the damage. What do we do? We can't stay here if we're not safe. Kofi's expression was determined. We're not leaving. We can't let them win. As the days passed, the tensions only grew. The fire had been a message, and Clara and Kofi knew they couldn't sit idly by. But who could they turn to? The local police, indifferent to their plight, had offered little help after the fire. There was no investigation, no follow-up, and it was clear that the authorities weren't going to do anything to protect them. But help came from an unexpected source. Clara's childhood friend, Jacob, reached out to her. He had moved away years ago, but had heard through the grapevine what was happening. He warned Clara that there were powerful forces in the town, people with money and influence, who wanted to see them gone. There's a group in this town, Jacob explained in hushed tones, meeting Clara and Kofi at a small dinner just outside of town. They've been running things behind the scenes for decades. The mayor, the police chief, some of the wealthier families, they are all in on it. Kofi's eyes narrowed. Why are they targeting us? Jacob looked around, lowering his voice even further. Because you're a threat. They've been trying to control who stays and who leaves this town for years, using fear to push people out. And you too, you don't fit into their vision. Clara's stomach twisted. So what do? We can't just leave. Kofi's resolve hardened. We fight back. We expose them. Determined to bring justice, Clara and Kofi started their own investigations. They scoured old records, newspaper clippings, and public documents, piecing together the connections between the town's leadership and the threats against them. What they found was worse than they had imagined. For years, the town's most powerful families had been quietly buying up lands and businesses, using intimidation and fear to force out anyone who didn't fit their mold. It wasn't just about race, it was about control. These families had built a monopoly over the town's economy and politics, and anyone who stood in their way was either silenced or driven out. We have to expose this, Clara said one night, her hands trembling as she laid out the evidence on the table. We can't let them get away with it. Kofi nodded, his eyes dark with determination. But we have to be careful. If they know we're coming for them, they will do whatever it takes to stop us. Clara and Kofi planned to present their findings at the next town hall meeting, but word of their investigation had already spread. The people they had uncovered weren't going to sit idly by and let them destroy their empire. One evening, as they were going over their plan, they heard the sound of footsteps outside. They rushed to the window to see a group of men gathering in their yard, armed with bats and torches. The leader of the group stepped forward, his face twisted with a sneer. You should have left when you had the chance. Kofi stood tall, his voice calm but firm. We're not leaving. We won't be silenced. The tension was palpable as the men closed in, their intent clear. But just as the situation seemed on the brink of violence, the sound of siren filled the air. Police cars, led by Jacob and a few honest officers, arrived in time to disperse the mob and arrest the men who had come to threaten them. In the days following their victory, the town of Clara's childhood began to slowly transform. The corrupt officials who had ruled through fear and intimidation were gone. The tight grip of hatred and prejudice that had plagued the community was beginning to loosen. Neighbors who had once looked upon Clara and Kofi with suspicion were now offering small smiles, tentative gestures of goodwill, and some even began to ask for forgiveness. Clara and Kofi had not only survived the hostility, they had sparked a revolution. The town was now a place where change seemed possible, and for the first time since their arrival, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm golden glow across their porch, Clara stood by the railing, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Kofi came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "Look at this," she said softly, leaning to him. "We've come so far." Kofi kissed the top of her head, his gaze following hers to the horizon. "Yes, we have, but the journey isn't over yet." Clara smiled, her hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "No, it's not," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and nervousness, "especially now that we have another journey ahead of us." Kofi's face softened, his eyes warm as he moved to her hand resting on her belly. "Are you sure?" he asked, though the joy in his voice was unmistakable. Clara nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, we are going to have a baby, Kofi." For a moment they stood in silence, letting the weight of this new chapter wash over them. It wasn't just their lives they were fighting for anymore. It was the life of their child, the future they would create for him or her. A new sense of purpose filled Kofi's heart as he imagined their child growing up in a world they had helped to reshape. Kofi's hand joined Clara's, resting gently on her stomach. "Our child will know both worlds," he said quietly. "The beauty and strength of Africa and the resilience of this land. We will teach him where he comes from, and one day he will carry our legacy forward." Clara leaned her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "He will be strong like you, brave and wise." "And like you," Kofi added, "full of love and kindness. And he will know his history, both sides of it." They stood together, imagining the future for their child. There would be challenges, there always were, but their child would grow up knowing love, knowing courage, and knowing the strength that came from the stories of both his parents. As they prepared for the arrival of their baby, Clara and Kofi found themselves reflecting on the long road they had traveled together. From the trials in Africa to the dangers they had faced in Georgia, they had overcome every obstacle thrown their way. But now they were about to embark on a new journey, one that would change everything. Their child would grow up in two worlds, learning about the rich heritage of Africa through Kofi's stories and understanding the complexities of America through Clara's experiences. They would teach him the values of strength, compassion, and resilience, and he would carry the lessons they had learned forward into his own life. But Clara and Kofi also knew that the world their child would grow up in wasn't perfect. Even though they had brought change to their own town, the echoes of hatred and fear still lingered. Their son would face challenges of his own. He would have to navigate a world that might not always accept him for who he was, for the rich mix of cultures and histories that flowed through his veins. Yet they were determined to prepare him for whatever lay ahead. He would know his roots, and he would understand the importance of fighting for what was right. He would carry the stories of his ancestors and he would learn from the struggles of his parents. And when the time came, he would carve out his own path in the world. For now, Clara and Kofi stood together, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. The future stretched before them, filled with both uncertainty and hope. But with a child on the way, their hearts were full, and they knew that whatever challenges came next, they would face them as a family. The next chapter of their story was just beginning. Amari was born with the legacy of royalty in his blood, but growing up in the small town Georgia, he's always felt torn between two worlds. His parents, who fought against all odds to be together, overcame countless struggles and made a life in America. But now, it's Amari's turn to face his own journey. As the son of an African prince and an American mother, he's caught between his roots and the pressures of fitting in. But when the call of his father's village in Africa grows stronger, he faces the toughest decision of his life. Will he leave behind everything he knows to embrace his destiny? Join us as we dive into Amari's journey of identity, love, and self discovery. Amari stared into the mirror, feeling like he was looking at two different versions of himself. At 16, he was tall, with the same strong features as his father, Kofi. His dark skin and proud posture reflected his African heritage, but his eyes, the thoughtful, kind ones he got from his mother, Clara, were full of uncertainty. Life in small town Georgia wasn't easy for someone like him, caught between two worlds. His father always spoke about the Massai Village in Africa, where their family was royalty, and one day Amari would be expected to lead. But here in America, being a prince didn't mean anything. It was just a story his dad told. At school, Amari wasn't seen as a prince. He was seen as different. Some kids made fun of him because of his African heritage, asking if he lived in huts or rode lions. The teasing never seemed to stop, and it hurt every time. But no matter how much it stung, Amari forced himself to laugh along with them, even when he felt like crying. He didn't want to stand out, he wanted to fit in. But no matter what he did, he always felt like an outsider. His father's words about their family's legacy echoed in his mind, but here in Georgia, reality felt like a fairy tale. Luckily, Amari had Malik and Jadin, his two best friends, who had been with him since elementary school. Malik was loud and always knew how to make everyone laugh, even in the worst situations. He could break any tension with a joke, and that made things easier. Jaden was mischievous and loved to get them into trouble with his wild ideas, but he always had Amari and Malik's back. The three of them had been through everything together, and with them, Amari didn't feel so lonely. But there was one person who made Amari's heart race like no one else, Zola. Zola had been his friend since they were kids. They had grown up together, their families close. She was smart, kind, and beautiful, with caramel-colored skin and deep brown eyes that seemed to sparkle whenever she laughed. She understood Amari in ways that no one else did. They had always been friends, but lately Amari found himself thinking about her more and more. His heart would pound whenever she was near, and his thoughts would drift to her when she wasn't. But the idea of telling her how he felt terrified him. What if she didn't feel the same way? What if it ruined their friendship? He wasn't sure if he could handle that. High school was a mix of good and bad for Amari. On the basketball court, he felt like he belonged. He was one of the best players on the team. And when he was out there, dribbling the ball and hearing the crowd cheer, everything else faded away. It was just him, the ball, and the game. For a little while, he could forget about feeling different. He could just be. But off the court, things weren't as simple. There weren't many African kids at his school, and that made him stand out in ways he didn't like. Some kids were curious about his heritage, asking him questions about what Africa was like, but others made fun of him. The teasing was relentless. One day, as Amari was walking to class, a group of kids started in on him. "You are from Africa, right?" One kid sneered. "Do you guys even have internet there?" Amari felt his stomach twist, anger bubbling up inside him. He hated how they made him feel like he didn't belong. Before he could respond, Malik jumped in, flashing his usual grin. "Yeah, his Wi-Fi is probably faster than your grandma's." The hallway filled with laughter, and the tension broke. Amari smiled, grateful for Malik's quick thinking, but the words still lingered. People didn't understand. They didn't get what it was like to grow up between two worlds, to feel like you didn't fit in anywhere. Being both African and African American was complicated. Amari often felt like he wasn't enough of either. Some of the black kids at school teased him for being too African, while others thought he wasn't black enough. It was a struggle, and no matter what he did, he felt like he couldn't win. On top of all that, there were his growing feelings for Zola. They had always been close, but lately everything felt different. Every conversation with her was charged with something unspoken. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but he was scared. What if she didn't like him back? What if it's messed everything up? One afternoon after basketball practice, Amari sat on the bleachers with Malik and Jaden. Malik, always quick to notice things, had caught on to Amari's distraction. "Man, you've got it bad," he teased. "Just tell her already." Amari sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple, Malik. She's my friend. If she didn't feel the same, it will mess everything up." Jaden, who was leaning back against the bench, smacked. "Look, you're already halfway to Africa with all this prince stuff," was one little confession. Amari rolled his eyes, but deep down he knew they were right. He couldn't keep hiding how he felt. He needed to tell Zola the truth, no matter how scared he was. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Between basketball games, school, and hanging out with his friends, Amari tried to keep himself busy. But every time he was around Zola, his feelings for her grew stronger, and it became harder and harder to keep them hidden. One evening, after a late basketball game, Amari and Zola were walking home together, like they always did. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with shades of purple and blue as the sun set. Zola was laughing about something funny that had happened in class, but Amari could barely focus. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his palms were sweating. This was it. He couldn't keep pretending anymore. "Zola, he said suddenly, interrupting her mid-sentence. His voice was shaky. She stopped walking and looked at him, her eyes full of curiosity. What's up, Amari? Amari took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. There's something I need to tell you. I've been holding it in for a long time, and I can't keep pretending anymore. Zola's expression softened, and for a moment the world around them seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them standing there on the quiet street, with only the sound of the wind rustling the trees. I like you, Amaris said, his voice barely above a whisper. I mean more than like you. I've had feelings for you for a while now. For a moment, Zola didn't say anything, and Amari's heart dropped. Had he ruined everything? But then a slow smile spread across her face. You took your time, she said, her voice teasing but warm. I was wondering when you were going to say something. Amari blinked in surprise. Wait! You knew? Zola laughed softly and brushed her hand against his. Of course I knew. I've liked you too, Amari. I just didn't know if you felt the same. Relief washed over Amari like a wave, and suddenly everything felt right. He had been so scared to tell her the truth, but now that he had, it was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. They walked the rest of the way home together, hand in hand, talking and laughing like they always had. But now there was something different. There was no more pretending. Even with Zola by his side, there was something else weighing on Amari's mind. One afternoon, Kofi sat him down to talk, and Amari knew it was serious. Amari, Kofi began, his deep voice filling the room. There is something you need to understand about where you come from. Amari listened closely as his father explained their family's royal lineage. He had always known that his family came from a Massai village in Africa. But now Kofi was telling him about the responsibilities that came with that lineage. One day, Amari would be expected to take on the role of leader in their village. You come from a long line of kings, Kofi said, and one day you will need to return to the village and take your place. The weight of his father's words settled on Amari's shoulders. He had always known about the village, but now it felt real. His father was telling him that one day he would be the one leading the village, making decisions for the people. It was a heavy responsibility, and Amari wasn't sure if he was ready for it. How will I know when it's time? Amari asked quietly. Kofi smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. You will feel it in your heart when the time comes. You will know. Just a few months later, Amari's life took a turn he never expected. One evening, after a basketball game, he and his friends were walking home, laughing and joking. The night felt perfect, and they were just about to head back to their houses when they noticed the flashing lights of a police car behind them. Amari's heart sank. They weren't doing anything wrong, but the sight of those lights sent a wave of fear through him. The police car pulled up next to them, and two officers stepped out. What are you boys doing out here this late? One officer asked, his hand resting on his belt. We're just walking home from the game, Malik said, trying to keep his voice steady. But the officer wasn't satisfied. You got ID? He asked. Amari felt the tension rise. They hadn't done anything wrong, but it didn't matter. After a few minutes of back and forth, the officers decided to take them to the station for loitering. Amari had never been in trouble before, and now he found himself in the back of a police car, feeling completely helpless. At the station, they were questioned for hours. No charges were filed, but the experience left Amari shaking to his core. Being treated like a criminal simply for walking down the street made him feel small and powerless. His parents came to pick him up, and while Clara hugged him tightly, Kofi's face was filled with a quiet anger. This is the reality we face, Kofi said as they drove home, his voice calm but firm. This country sees us differently. You've got to be twice as strong, twice as smart just to survive. Amari barely spoke the rest of the night. The feeling of helplessness, the way the officers had treated him and his friends, left a deep scar. As he lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, his father's words echoed in his mind. Maybe Kofi was right. Maybe the answers he was looking for weren't here in America. Maybe it was time to go to Africa and understand the part of him that had always felt out of reach. The experience with the police left Amari shaking. Sitting in the back of that police car, being treated like a criminal, despite doing nothing wrong, opened his eyes to the harsh reality his father had always warned him about. No matter how hard he tried to fit in, America would always see him as different. The feeling of helplessness from that night stayed with him, and Amari couldn't shake the thought that maybe his place wasn't here after all. In the days that followed, his mind kept drifting back to Africa, the village his father had told him about, and the legacy that awaited him there. The idea of going back, of learning about his heritage, and stepping into the role of a leader started to feel like something he needed, not just a duty he had to fulfill. The final push came during a Black History Month event at school. Amari stood in front of his classmates, speaking proudly about his African heritage, and for the first time he felt truly connected to the stories his father had told him. After the event, he knew what he had to do. That night, he sat down with his parents. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. I need to go to Africa, he said. I need to see the village and understand my roots. It's time for me to take my place. Clara smiled through her tears. We always knew this day would come, she said. Kofi nodded, pride shining in his eyes. You are ready to embrace who you are. But before anything else, Amari knew he needed to talk to Zola. Later that night, Amari met Zola under the stars at the usual spot by the old oak tree. The night was quiet, but Amari's thoughts were racing. He sat beside her, trying to find the right words. I've decided to go to Africa, he said, breaking the silence. To my father's village. It's time for me to take my place. Zola blinked, processing what he had said. Wow! Amari, that's a big decision. Are you leaving for good? Amari shook his head. I don't know how long I'll be gone, but I can't ignore it anymore. I need to understand who I am and where I come from. Zola was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled softly. I always knew you were destined for something great. Amari hesitated for a moment, then took her hand. Zola, I don't want to do this alone. I want you to come with me. Zola's eyes widened. You want me to go to Africa with you? Yeah, Amari said, his voice steady. You've always been there for me, and I can't imagine doing this without you. Zola smiled again, a mix of excitement and uncertainty on her face. Of course, I'll go with you. We've been through everything together, and I'm not stopping now. With Zola by his side, Amari felt more confident about the journey ahead. In the days that followed, they packed and said goodbye to their friends. The thought of stepping into the unknown filled Amari with both excitement and nerves, but he knew this was a right choice. As the plane took off, Amari looked out the window, watching the ground disappear beneath them. Zola squeezed his hand, and for the first time he felt ready to embrace his future. The prince was going home, this time with the girl he loved by his side. Amari was born in America, but the spirit of his ancestors has always called him back to Africa. Now, he is returning to his father's village to take his rightful place as king. But the land is troubled. The balance between the village and the spirit world has been broken, and Amari must face challenges greater than he ever imagined. Guided by the wisdom of Mama Zola and supported by his love Zola, Amari embarks on a journey filled with ancient spirits, powerful trials, and a fight to restore harmony. Will he prove worthy of his crown? Join us as we explore the trials, dangers, and triumphs that await Amari on his quest to reclaim his legacy and save his people. Amari stepped off the small plane and into the thick, warm air of the African countryside. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the air, and the wind smelled different here, rich and full of life, with hints of spices and wood smoke. This was the place his father had told him about all his life, the village of his ancestors, the land of kings. Now, after years of hearing stories, he was here, ready to take his place as their leader. But as he looked around, Amari could sense that something wasn't right. The village looked tired. The trees, which his father had said were once strong and full of life, seemed to sag, their leaves heavy with some invisible weight. The wind blew softly, but it felt like a whisper, carrying with it a sadness that Amari couldn't quite understand yet. Beside him, Zola, his childhood friend, and now his closest companion, took it all in with wide, amazed eyes. She had never been to Africa before, and she was fascinated by the vibrant colors, the earthy smells, and the people bustling around them. She had come with Amari to support him, but even she could feel that the village wasn't as it should be. Amari's father, Kofi, had told him stories about this village since he was a little boy. He spoke of the strong bonds between the people and the spirits that lived in the land, the spirits of the trees, the rivers, and even the winds. The spirits helped guide the people, but only if they were respected and honored. Kofi had warned him that when the spirits were upset, the village would suffer. And now, standing here, Amari could feel it in his bones. Something was wrong. As they walked through the village, people came out of their homes to greet him. They smiled and waved, calling him Prince Amari, but their eyes didn't match their smiles. There was worry and sadness in their faces. They had waited a long time for their prince to return, but it seemed they were also hoping for him to fix something, a problem much bigger than him. Amari could feel the pressure building in his chest. He had come here to become king, but now he realized it wouldn't be as simple as he thought. There was more to this than a ceremony of wearing crown. Something had happened in the village, something he would have to understand and fix if he was going to lead these people. Amari knew he needed to seek help. His father had often spoken of Mama Zola, the village elder. She was wise beyond her years, and she had a special connection with the spirits. Kofi had told Amari that when he had faced his own challenges as a young man in the village, it was Mama Zola who had helped him through. "We need to find Mama Zola," Amari said to Zola as they walked through the village. "She will know what's going on." They made their way to the edge of the village where Mama Zola's hut stood tall among the ancient trees. The moment they entered the clearing around her home, Amari could feel a shift in the air. It was quieter here, like the trees were holding their breath, waiting for something important to happen. When they arrived at the hut, Mama Zola was already outside, sitting on a wooden stool. Her silver hair shimmered in the sunlight, and her eyes, deep and wise, looked at them as if she already knew why they had come. "You've returned just as I knew you would," Mama Zola said, her voice soft but strong. "But you didn't come just to take the throne, did you? You feel it, don't you? The trouble in the village." Amari nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yes," he said. "Something is wrong. The trees, the wind, it feels heavy, like the whole village is sad." Mama Zola nodded, her face serious. "The spirits are upset," she said. "The balance between our world and the spirit world had been broken. The Olu Iwi, the great spirit that protects the forest, is hungry. You must seek the Olu Iwi and restore the balance, or the village will continue to suffer." Amari felt a chill run down his spine. He had known there would be challenges, but this sounded far more serious than he had imagined. "What must I do?" he asked, trying to steady his voice. "The Oluiwi will test you," Mama Zola said. "You will face 3 trials: the trial of heart, the trial of strength, and the trial of truth. Only by passing these trials can you restore the balance and prove that you are worthy to lead this village." Amari swallowed hard. The thought of facing 3 trials made him nervous, but he knew there was no other way. "I'll do it," he said, his voice filled with determination. Zola stepped forward, her hand resting on his arm. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice steady. "You don't have to face this alone, Amari." Mama Zola smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at the two of them. "Your bond is strong, and that will help you on this journey," she said. "But remember, Amari, a king must be wise and brave. You will need both to pass these trials." The next morning, Amari and Zola set out for the sacred forest. The village elders had warned them of the dangers that lay ahead, but Amari was not afraid. He felt connected to this land, even though he had never lived there. His father had told him stories of how spirits of their ancestors lived in the trees, in the rivers, and even in the wind. As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew quiet, and the sunlight barely broke through the thick canopy of leaves above. "We're getting close," Zola whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The forest felt alive. It was watching them. Every rustle of leaves seemed to be a whisper from an unseen spirit. Hours passed, and finally they reached a clearing where a massive tree stood, towering over the forest. Its bark glowed faintly in the dim light, and the air around it felt heavy, like it was with an ancient power. This was the place where the Olu-Iwi lived. "This must be it," Amari said, his voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shake, and from the base of the tree, a figure began to rise. It was enormous, made of vines and branches, with glowing eyes that watched them carefully. This was the Olu-Iwi, the spirit of the forest. "You have come to seek my wisdom," the Olu-Iwi said, his voice deep and rumbling like thunder. "But wisdom must be earned. You must prove yourself worthy." Amari took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'm ready," he said, even though his heart was racing. The Olu-Iwi looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "You must face 3 trials," it said. "The trial of heart, the trial of strength, and the trial of truth. Only by passing these trials will you restore the balance and be worthy to lead." Amari nodded, feeling both fear and determination. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't turn back now. The village was counting on him. The first trial began almost immediately. Amari was no longer in the forest. He found himself standing in the middle of a vast, open plain with a deep, dark gap in the ground before him. On the other side of the gap stood his parents, younger than he had ever seen them. They were calling out to him, their voices soft but filled with love. They asked him to cross the gap to join them. His heart ached to be with them, to feel the warmth of their embrace. But the gap was wide, and there was no way to cross it. Amari's heart pounded in his chest. His parents were everything to him, and the thought of not reaching them made him want to jump across, no matter the danger. But something in his heart told him to stop. The gap was too wide, and as much as he wanted to go to them, he knew this wasn't real. "These aren't my parents," Amari whispered to himself. "This is a trick." He knew that his real parents wouldn't ask him to do something impossible. So therefore, he took a step back, refusing to cross the gap. As soon as he made that decision, the figures of his parents disappeared, and the gap in the ground closed. He had passed the trial of hearts by trusting his instincts and knowing what was real and what wasn't. Before he could catch his breath, the second trial came. Amari found himself back in the forest, but this time a giant creature was charging towards him. It was a Ngrumo, a thunder beast with glowing eyes and a roar that shook the ground beneath him. The creature's massive paws hit the earth like thunder, and his eyes locked onto Amari. Amari's legs trembled with fear, but he knew he couldn't run. He didn't have a weapon, just his own strength and determination. The Ingrumo lunged at him, its sharp claws reaching out to strike. But Amari grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and held his ground. With all his strength, he swung the branch at the beast, striking it with every ounce of power he had. The battle was fierce, but Amari refused to give up. With one final blow, he struck the Ingrumo, and it vanished into the shadows, disappearing into the mist. He had passed the trial of strength by standing his ground and fighting back, even when he was afraid. Exhausted but determined, Amari now faced the final trial. The Oluiwi appeared once more, holding a large, shimmering mirror in its hands. "Look into the mirror and see the truth," it said. Amari hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and looking into the mirror. But instead of seeing his own reflection, he saw the faces of his ancestors. Kings and queens from generations past stared back at him, their eyes filled with pride and expectation. "Do you accept your place among them?" the Oluyewe asked. Amari felt the weight of their gazes, and for a moment doubt flickered in his heart. Could he really live up to the legacy of his ancestors? Could he be the leader the village needed? But then he thought of everything he had been through. He wasn't just the boy from America. He wasn't just a prince from this village. He was both. He was a bridge between two worlds, and that was his strength. "I accept," Amari said, his voice steady and sure. The mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the Oluyomi nodded. "You have passed the trials. The balance is restored, and you are ready to lead." Amari returned to the village, his heart full of pride and relief. The news of his success spread quickly, and the villagers rushed to greet him. The air, which had felt heavy and sad before, was now light and full of joy. The trees, which had sagged under some invisible weight, now stood tall and proud. The spirits of the land were at peace once more, and so were the people. Amari's grandparents were the first to greet him, their faces shining with pride. His father, Kofi, and his mother, Clara, stood nearby, smiling with relief and joy. Amari had passed the trials, and now he was ready to become king. But the celebrations weren't over yet. The village had prepared a special ceremony to mark the beginning of Amari's reign, a marriage to Zola. The villagers had watched as Zola stood by Amari through every challenge, and now she would stand by him as his queen. That evening, under the stars, the village gathered once more. The drums beat in time with the heartbeats of the earth, and the night air was filled with the scents of flowers and fresh earth. Zola, dressed in traditional Maasai clothes, stood beside Amari, her face glowing with happiness. Mama Zola, the wise elder, stood before them, her voice clear and strong as she led the ceremony. "Today we celebrate not only a king, but the union of two hearts," she said. "Together, Amari and Zola will lead us into a new era of peace, love, and balance." Amari and Zola exchanged their vows, their voices steady and filled with love. Amari felt the weight of the moment, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt right. He was not just a boy from America or a prince from the village. He was King Amari, and Zola was his queen. Together, they would lead the people with wisdom, strength, and love. As the ceremony ended, the village erupted into cheers. The night was filled with dancing, laughter, and music that echoed through the hills. Amari and Zola joined in the celebration, their hearts full of joy and hope for the future. As they stood together, watching the people of the village celebrate, Amari knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. He had come back to the village to restore balance. And now, with Zola by his side, he was ready to lead. The stars above them twinkled brightly, as if the spirits themselves were watching and smiling down on the new king and queen. Together, Amari and Zola would guide the village forward, their hearts full of love, their hands joined in unity, and their future bright with promise.